On to the next speaker now. I'm going to invite David Holmes, who is going to share with us now. David is the creator of Ashes to Blooms, which is a tribute to his brother, and really looking forward to what David's going to share with us. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Josh, and thanks, Amanda, for inviting me tonight. First of all, I do feel like a bit of an imposter. My parents are not heavy drinkers, they barely drink at all. My family and I have come to the effects of alcohol sort of much later in life, after we lost our brother Andrew last year. And we lost him after he had a long alcohol battle. So as children, there were four of us, my older brother Andrew and I, and my two younger sisters, growing up in Worthing on the south coast. Andrew was the oldest and extremely intelligent, witty, really good sense of humour, but at school he was bullied terribly, and he was quite reclusive by nature. Nowadays at school, autism seems to be brilliantly diagnosed and picked up early. I would say Andrew was very clearly autistic with very obsessive tendencies, focusing on specific hobbies, being reclusive, and I would say he was very clearly autistic, and because it wasn't really on people's radars back then, that wasn't picked up, and I think alcohol ended up being a crutch that he used to try and deal with it. So, as I said, he had these typical autistic tendencies where he'd have these obsessive interests and hobbies. So it might be fishing, fly making, cooking, gardening, bonsai trees. That would become his life, and he would just do that all day, every day, buying all the equipment, and he was just obsessed with whatever subject was his current hobby. As soon as Andrew turned 18, he went off to Southampton for uni, and pretty much after that, he didn't come back. I think, being bullied at school, he was happy to be away, starting a new life. While he was at uni, he worked as a bouncer in nightclub doors. I think he did everything he could to get away from being that sort of geeky loner that he had been at school. So after he did a few jobs in Hastings and Amersham, he eventually moved to London and found his home in Shoreditch. He worked for big banks. People earlier in the evening talked about working in the corporate world, and Andrew was in that, working for big banks. He worked as a quant, designing software for the big banks that they used to do their trades. This was all during the big financial crash, and he was made redundant twice by Goldman Sachs and one of the other banks, and he used his redundancy money to invest in his spare time. So he was working in these jobs, but at the same time he suffered terribly with his mental health. As I've sort of mentioned, autism, depression, anxiety, OCD, and just throughout this period suffering with terrible mental health. During that sort of whole period of Andrew's adult working life, sort of about 10 years, he very much kept us at arm's length. And really over that time he pushed us all away, and we would see him maybe once a year for lunch, if we were lucky. And again, with that sort of sporadic obsessive behaviour, he would tend to either be very skinny or very big, have lots of hair or almost no hair, but consistently we'd sit down for a meal and he'd drink his beer, order the next, drink his beer, order the next, order a whiskey, and he'd often be quite shaky and anxious and might disappear before the end of the meal. So it was clear that he wasn't well, and I know that especially for Mum, it being her firstborn, him being in this state, was a big worry to her. She was always trying to re-establish that connection and have regular contact, but most of the time if she'd ring him, she wouldn't get an answer and he wouldn't call back. about 10 years ago, after he'd been suffering with his mental health for many years, and actually in his last year, he said to us he remembers since when he was a child wanting to be dead. But anyway, we weren't aware of that at the time. It was only in the later years we knew about his mental health struggles. He was eventually signed off by his employer, and in short, they sort of paid him off rather than having him on his books, having him on their books, sort of costing them money. So they paid him off, and he was pretty much set adrift. After that, he was mostly at home. He was quite reclusive by nature. He was sort of just at home, sort of investing. He didn't want to have to go back into that world, so trying to invest his money to make sure he didn't have to go back into that world. Working on all his hobbies, his obsessive hobbies like his art, and trying to get help for his mental health issues, trying to get diagnoses. But despite all his efforts, no one ever seemed to be able to give him a clear diagnosis and give him the answer that he was looking for. As I said, we barely saw him in 10 years, and he kept us away most of the time. About 18 months ago, so 1 year before he died, Mum called Andrew, as she often did, trying to get through to him. On that day he answered. They had a great call, and Mum always says after that day they just never stopped calling. After that, it was just day in, day out. You know, they got each other. Andrew told Mum and Dad how much he loved them. We always doubted if he cared about any of us at all. But he started talking, and he was really clear about how he felt about us all. Mum started visiting Andrew regularly, but it was quickly apparent to all of us that he was very unwell when she was visiting up in London. Andrew was unsteady on his feet. I didn't know this about alcohol, but if you drink a lot over an extended period, it sort of affects your balance long term, and he was left in a state where he could really barely leave his sofa and wouldn't leave his flat. He got all his food delivered by Sainsbury's. One occasion he managed to get himself to the door, but on opening the door for the Sainsbury's guy, he just collapsed, and he said to the guy, "Just leave me here," and the guy had to deliver the food bags past Andrew and just left Andrew because his legs didn't work. He was having constant falls. When we visited, Andrew always had cider on the go, and in case his alcohol levels were getting low, he'd always have vodka close to hand in case he needed a quick glass of vodka to stave off seizures or anything like that. But he continued to be himself, being clever, funny, kind, maintaining his obsessive hobbies, interests, reading and cooking, and very much caring for all of us. During the sort of 12 months that we were back in contact with Andrew, he managed to, with his own determination, he did anything he wanted to. He weaned himself totally off alcohol, but on weaning himself off it, he was just left with these long empty days, and he actually decided that he was better off spending those days drunk than being sat there without the alcohol for entertainment or to keep him occupied. We visited regularly and visited him on his regular hospital visits, trying to help him pass the time. But even during that, he was constantly talking about the quality of the food in the hospitals, and telling us about all the different foods he'd been trying. And he always seemed to try and make the visits interesting for us, and he never wallowed in self-pity. In May last year, we went up for his 40th birthday, and I just had these cakes made with little artist's easel on them, and he was genuinely happy. And despite the fact that really his body was failing, he was really grateful we were there, and I think he was glad that we were back in his life. Each time he was discharged, we had battles with social services, people wanting and trying to do their best, not having enough time or facilities to really be able to help. He'd have appointments booked with social services, and he'd sit there waiting for them, and invariably they would get missed, and he would just be left getting nowhere with treatment and just being bounced around by people who wanted to do good, but he always seemed to fall through the cracks. Another aspect was every time we visited him, we were forced to visit the corner shop to buy alcohol for him. He was an alcoholic, clearly dying from it. But if we weren't buying him the alcohol, he was having seizures and banging his head. And we felt compelled to keep on buying him the alcohol. When we felt throughout like we didn't get help from anyone, even his housing association wouldn't let us have a key safe outside his building. So every time he had a fall, we had to get up from Worthing on the south coast up to London to let in emergency services, because we weren't even allowed to have a key safe on his building. August last year, he was having a lot of his falls, and despite being very intelligent and insightful, wouldn't accept that anything was to do with his drinking. In late August, he had a bad fall and had a horrible cut to his chin, and when we visited, he just said no, he wasn't going to the hospital. Then on the 23rd of August, we couldn't get hold of him, and my sister Caroline, who's actually on this video call today, her and her husband went up just after midnight on the morning of the 24th to check on him, and he was sound asleep on his sofa, so Caroline and Hauke left him alone and went home. The next morning, my mum tried ringing him and couldn't get through, and she instantly knew something was wrong. That was my day to be in London, so she said, take your keys with you, there's something not right. So I went off to work in London as usual. She got the train up, and late morning I got a call from my other sister to say that Mum had been to the flat and Andrew had passed during the night, and when she got there he was still warm. I got to his flat and Mum was there with Andrew's body, holding his hand and just spending the last time with him. That was the last time that any of us were really with Andrew, and I've tried to focus on the cost of alcohol, and in summary, losing Andrew and his great wit and intelligence, that was the cost of alcohol to us. After many months we got the result of the autopsy, and they found he'd got bleed on the brain caused by his fall, and he was also suffering from a failing heart, and he's got almost no useful liver left. Andrew was 40 when he died, with the most incredible wit, intelligence, kindness and wisdom, and despite all that strength and this determination, he wasn't able to escape alcohol or his demons. As a result of losing Andrew and having another loss last year, I started a business called Ashes to Blooms, creating seed balls using ashes mixed with seeds. People can plant these to create wildflower memorials, and I've really created that as a legacy to Andrew. All of us have tried to honour him in our own way and bring his art into our lives and tell his story, but alcohol's robbed us of Andrew, and my sister, she's looking forward to having a baby, but that child will never know its uncle, and that's what alcohol has robbed all of us of.
Wow, David, wow. For you to be able to speak that in the way that you just have, with such raw emotion is pretty powerful.
Thank you.
And I just want to say power to you for being able to do it. I know I've said it for every speaker, but
thank you.
Particularly in this case, that felt very, very strong and powerful. So I appreciate it, and we really appreciate you. I know you started off by saying you feel almost like an imposter, or I don't know if that's the word that you used, but
yeah,
you're certainly very welcome here, and we
thank you. I feel welcome.
You.
Thank you.
Yeah,
cheers, Joe.
Thank you. In the interest of time, the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to move on to the next speaker, and then we'll invite questions for both David and Julie after. I think that's going to be the best way to do it. So